welcome to the Rational Response Squad. I'm Brian Sapient.
I am Rook Hawkins.
I'm Yellow Number 5.
And I'm Razor.
And we are
the Rational Response Squad.
Today we will be joined by Steve Gregg, a Christian radio show host, and also we'll hear from Rook on a dissertation that he is currently in the process of writing here today on recording day, although by the time this show comes out, he may very well be done that dissertation, and you can find thoughts from Rook in the Rational Thoughts category, all things Rook Hawkins, at rationalresponders.com. If you don't know already, that's one of Rook's specialty, is writing very long papers on some historical things related to Christianity that most of us don't take the time to research, and in fact, very hard to get Christians to listen into these types of arguments. It's a shame, because this is really what they should be geared into.
Oh, most certainly. I think that the history of their faith should be most important to every Christian out there.
I mean, if you remember the Brian Fleming video and the God Who Wasn't There, he went to the Billy Graham convention, interviewed people on the street, asked them what they knew about the history of Christianity, and none of them knew anything.
As a matter of fact, I even did my own survey. It's true that only 2 out of every 10 people know something other than or know of the history of Christianity. The other 8 people have absolutely no idea.
It's really a shame, because people base their entire lives on this myth, and they don't even know how it started.
It's a shame. It really is.
And if you would have that knowledge, you most likely would understand why it's myth and how easily it is to see that it's bullshit.
Exactly. And I think if more Christians knew of the origins of their religion, the less they would take any credence to it.
Yeah, but you guys don't know the history of atheism.
Actually, I do.
Yeah, we'll see. Humanity started, ergo atheism.
Damn.
See? Did you know that the very first Christians considered themselves atheists?
How's that?
Justin Martyr wrote a dissertation himself, an apology, actually. And in his apology, he claims himself to be an atheist towards every other god except for his one true God. But he calls himself an atheist.
I see. Yeah, that's interesting. That is Stephen Roberts, that I claim that we're both atheists. I just believe in one fewer gods than you do. So,
right. Well, fortunately, he wasn't around when Justin Martyr was, and had he been, Justin Martyr might not have been a Christian.
At first glance, saying that Justin Martyr or the early Christians were an atheist sounds like some sort of quote mining technique that you would hear like Ray Comfort use when he says that Charles Darwin didn't believe in evolution.
Right.
Which I heard this twat bag Todd Friel on the Infidel Guy show try to state that even Charles Darwin didn't believe in macroevolution. He only believed in micro. I was like, yeah, fuck you, Todd Friel.
Exactly. Fuck you.
Twat bag.
Twat bag. You like that? How about douche canoe?
That's great.
Yeah. So anyway,
Guzzler. I like that one.
With that thought in mind, let's call up Steve Gregg.
Okay. Guzzler brought that thought to your mind.
No, douche canoe did.
Okay.
Yeah, it's all fun and games until somebody loses an eye, okay? So, we will take a brief commercial break, and in a moment, we will be joined by Steve Gregg. You can visit Steve right now. Check out what he's up to at www.thenarrowpath.com.
Wow, what a perfect name that is.
I think I know where that comes from.
The Narrow Mind?
No. What is it? Straight is the gate, narrow is the path.
And now, from the city of brotherly love, America's birthplace, historic Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, we present tonight's main event. In the majority's corner, weighing in with about 85% of the world's population behind them, if they only could agree on the same version of God, fighting for all that us critical thinkers see as a myth, it's our token theist. And in the rational corner, from Philadelphia, a group of men that need no introduction, weighing in at a near infinite amount of reasoning ability and critical thinking skills, defenders of logic, and fighting to free humanity from the mind disease known as theism, the Rational Response Squad!
With us on the line now is Steve Gregg. As I said before, commercial. You can visit Steve's website at thenarrowpath.com. He is a Christian radio show host. And with me, Steve, is my biblical partner, Rook Hawkins.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, good.
Got my Science Geek, yellow number 5.
Hey, Steve, how you doing?
And the Rational Inquisitor, Razorcade.
Hey, what's up, man?
Hey, good to talk to you guys.
So, I'm curious, just to get the ball rolling here, give me a reason why we should believe in God, and not just an appeal to emotion, but something evidentiary.
Well, I consider Jesus to be the best testimony to that, and I believe that the Gospels in the Bible are good testimony to what he said and did. I believe that arguments to the contrary are, frankly, unconvincing, and that if we had witnesses in court that resembled the witnesses we have in the Gospels, any jury would have to find in their favor, and that would be the main argument I have in favor of God.
Now, that's interesting because I just recently went to Barnes & Noble and purchased the Flying Spaghetti Monster Gospel. Have you heard of it?
Nope.
It's a book by Bobby Henderson about how the world was started and it was created by the Flying Spaghetti Monster. It sounds that by your logic, using the Bible to prove that the Bible is accurate, that I must also look at the Flying Spaghetti Monster as proof that it exists from reading itself. How can I use a book to prove itself without extraneous sources?
Well, you didn't represent my position correctly. I didn't use the Bible to prove the Bible to be accurate. I take the testimony of the 4 Gospels at face value as ancient historical documents, just as I would any other ancient historical documents. The fact that they're part of a collection we call the Bible is immaterial to my consideration.
Now, you say that you take the Gospels as a historical verification of the existence of Jesus. Is that correct?
That's correct.
When do you propose these Gospel accounts were written?
Well, notwithstanding the scholarship that has made claims to the contrary the past 200 years, I personally believe what the ancient writers who were closest to the situation believed, and that is that 3 of them, at least, were written by eyewitnesses.
Okay.
And the 4th one that was not written by an eyewitness was written by a second-hand witness who interviewed the eyewitnesses, which makes pretty close to the testimony.
Who were these contemporaries you speak of who claim these Gospels were written as first-hand accounts?
Okay, well, Atheists, for example, who wrote in the end of the 1st century, 2nd century Christian himself, he said that he had talked to people who had known the apostles, and that he got most of his information from them. He indicated that Matthew was the writer of an early gospel in Aramaic, apparently, and translated into Greek by various people. He indicated that Mark was the writer of the 2nd gospel and that he was basically the translator for Peter. Papias, to my knowledge, I don't recall that he said anything about Luke's gospel or John's, but the early writers in the 2nd century certainly didn't have any question about who the writers of those gospels were. And it seems to me rather incredible that the founding documents of a movement, their authorship would be forgotten within 3 generations of their writing by those who actually use the documents on a regular basis and who would have an interest in preserving the knowledge of their origin.
You are aware of who Eusebius is, correct?
I am. I've read Eusebius.
Okay, you were aware that the only account of Papias is in Eusebius, correct?
That's the only surviving account of Papias, that's right.
Okay, you understand that even Eusebius suggests in his time, when he was writing the histories, that Papias was wrong.
No, he did not. He said that Papias was a man of little understanding, and he was referring to Papias' view about the millennium, because Eusebius considered that the millennium was a view invented by Cerinthus, a contemporary of John, and a Gnostic heretic. And so when he was speaking about Papias' view of the millennium, he said that Papias was mistaken because he was a man of little understanding, and because he took literally certain statements of the apostles which should have been taken figuratively. He did not call into question Papias' historical accuracy.
I beg to differ. Give me 1 second here.
Well, in the meantime, while Rook is looking this up, say that we were to, for the sake of argument, simply accept these texts as historical accounts, and that there was a man named Jesus who did exist. How do we go from these accounts to Jesus being the Son of God on earth in the flesh, who died and was resurrected?
Well, we don't have to go very far because those texts themselves record that fact. If the texts are the witness of, if it is the testimony of eyewitnesses in many cases, and of those who knew the eyewitnesses and interviewed them and gave honest reflections of what they had said, then I'd say it's pretty good testimony to all the points you just asked about. The earliest witness to the resurrection of Christ is, of course, not in the Gospels at all, but is in Paul's list in 1 Corinthians 15 of the resurrection appearances, which even most critical scholars, Paul says he received that from earlier witnesses, and most critical scholars think that the tradition he's quoting dates back to about 7 or 8 years after the time of the alleged death of Christ.
Okay, well, I mean, for me, it's the supernatural events that make this hard to swallow. Yeah, we're talking about witness accounts, but, say we were reading a witness account of the Crimean War. No one disputes the fact that, the Crimean War happened or anything like that. But specific events in it, and certainly, if there were a mythic figure from another religion, say a Greek god or goddess that made an appearance in that war or something like that, you certainly wouldn't, believe this account of that god or goddess appearing, or of anything that supernatural happened in these events that no one disputes happened. So you need a little bit more than an eyewitness account to demonstrate that.
Sure that. I think that I would not dispute the possibility of supernatural things happening in other contexts outside the Bible. Of course, if there was a mythical god that was said to appear in a war, I would certainly consider that evidence to be entirely different than that of the testimony of people who were talking about a real historical character whom they knew and lived with. None of the Greeks or Romans claimed to have met the Greek or Roman gods. They knew of them only as mythology, whereas the apostles lived with Jesus Christ. You are quite correct, I'm sure, in saying it's the supernatural element that gives you trouble, and I would consider that to be a matter of your own prejudices.
Well, no, it's not my prejudices. You're talking to an apostate here, and it's more an objection from a scientific standpoint. There's no way an eyewitness account could ever be taken as sufficient evidence for a dead body coming back to life.
Or even in a court of law today, when you said that, the court of law would have to agree that the gospel accounts are evidence. I'm sorry, that would not be correct, especially with all the inconsistencies in there, which I will get to and address later. Are
you familiar with Simon Greenleaf?
Simon Greenleaf? I am vaguely aware of the name. I am not certain I know of him.
Okay, well, he was one of the founders of Harvard Law School.
Okay.
And he wrote one of the classic works called A Treatise on the Laws of Evidence.
Okay.
It was a 3-volume work that is still considered the main work of authority on the laws of evidence for court.
Okay.
He wrote a treatise called The Testimony of the Evangelists, where he brought up all the laws of evidence that are followed in a court of law, and he examined the 4 Gospels on the basis of those laws, and he said that no jury could possibly discredit their accounts. You see, if you would, you could only do so on the supposition that supernatural things don't happen.
It's a fallacy. It's an appeal to authority.
That would be an appeal to an authority. That's a logical fallacy. But aside from that,
well, no, it's regardless of who the authority is. It's his personal
opinion
here,
to begin with.
It's not personal opinion that dead bodies come back to life. It's fact. We've never, ever seen that happen. There's never been a recorded, case of somebody being dead for 3 days and then, clinically dead, gone, and coming back.
Well, that's less relevant than you think it is, because the Bible doesn't claim that miracles happen all the time. The Bible only claims
apparently they happen quite often.
Special occasions.
Apparently they happen quite often back then.
God has times when he's doing something unusual and works miracles. Now, if you have the assumption that there is no God who can work miracles, then you can proceed from that to the assumption that God can never work miracles because there's no God to work them. But on the assumption that there might be a God who can work miracles.
That's us, by the way. We are under the assumption that there might be a God that can work miracles, just so you don't incorrectly state our position.
I don't disagree.
Which just so happens that there is no evidence to believe in that.
There's no evidence for me to believe that.
You keep using the word apostle when you talk about this, and I think that's very important because it's a pseudo-truth, and honestly, it's very deceptive, and I want to bring that to light. There's a huge difference between the meaning of apostle and disciple, and one dictates that someone would learn directly from the source, while the other dictates that they are just a student of that teaching. You keep using apostle and throwing it around as if it's a common term among those who followed Christianity in the early days, and it wasn't. They were called disciples. Disciples being that those who just followed the teachings of the way, as it's referred to in Acts, as the way. And you want to talk about Papias, okay? But Papias refers to people who he refers to the elders, okay? Which I'm sure you're aware of since you supposedly read Eusebius. If anyone happened to come who had actually been a follower of the elders, I would inquire about the sayings of the elders. What did Andrew or Peter say? What about Philip or Thomas or James? What about John or Matthew or any of the other disciples of the Lord? And the things that Aristion and John the elder say, who were also disciples of the Lord, for I thought that things from books did not benefit me as much as the sayings of a living and abiding voice. The elder also used to say this: Mark had been the interpreter or translator for Peter, and he wrote down as much as Peter told him of the sayings and deeds of Christ accurately, but not in order.
Here's what I would assert. In the Bible, the apostles were selected from a larger number who were called disciples, and therefore the apostles can be called disciples or apostles because they were both.
When do you think this?
The earliest record of early Christianity is in the Book of Acts. And
when do you think Acts was written? Why? I don't understand why you keep thinking that the earliest account of Christianity is the Book of Acts. The Book of Acts was written after Luke, probably by the same author as Luke, who was a physician. If all accounts are correct, I want to know why you think that these guys are anywhere near the time of Christ's supposed existence. You're making an assumption after an assumption without any evidence. The only evidence you can bring to me about this is Papias, who wrote supposedly in 130 CE, and the only account you have, the only verisimilitude that you could possibly bring here is a record of Eusebius 350 years later. And you're going to give me this and say that Eusebius, who himself recounts that he was dishonest for the ways of Christianity, whatever would bring about a betterment for his faith, okay? Forging Josephus, for example, he had himself Origen's library, I don't know if you know this, which also probably contained forgeries from Origen, and probably within transition between Origen and Eusebius, there was probably forgeries between there too. So let me ask you again, what evidence do you have to bring me contemporary accounts that these Gospels were written? The only mention of a Gospel is after 150 CE by anybody, 150 CE. And in fact, that's the only papyrus we have, and it's the P52 fragment, which is the only living fragment piece. There's nothing earlier than that. 150 CE. What can you bring me?
You're referring to the earliest fragment of the Gospel of John,
which is the only fragment we currently have that we have dated to that particular time period.
It's not really significant how old the manuscripts are.
Sure, it is. You have nothing earlier than that.
Not.
You have nothing earlier than that.
Excuse me. We have references to all the Gospels in the second century writers of Christianity, and to think that these second century writers who knew the first century writers could have forgotten who wrote their books is extremely unlikely. I really don't think that we will have much trouble determining, or that people 100 years from now will have much trouble determining what our famous authors have taught. Or let's put it this way, a well-known academic of the previous, of the earlier century, F.F. Bruce, who died in the 20th century, was very well respected. I think that 100 years from now, people who see his books will be able to trust that he wrote them, because we believe that we do preserve the knowledge of the writings that we admire. And, to say that they weren't written, that the Gospels weren't written near the time of Christ, or that Luke was not written near the time of Christ, or that Paul's letters were not, is to presuppose something that is different than what they claim. Paul certainly claims to be contemporary of the first apostles in all of his letters. And some of Paul's letters are not very much disputed by even critics as to whether they were authentic. In fact, 1 Corinthians, where he mentions having spent time with Peter and James and gotten information from them, is one of the epistles of Paul that critics least of all dispute. And Paul also mentions Luke as his companion. And, there's nothing intrinsically improbable about the beliefs of the second century church about these writings.
Have you ever heard of the Gnostics?
Of course.
When do you think they started?
Well, they are known to have been in existence in the 2nd century, and I think incipient Gnosticism was found in Cerinthus in the end of the 1st century. There are some indications in the epistle of 1 John and in Colossians that there was a growing sense of danger from some Gnostic views in the early church.
What if I told you that Paul was a Gnostic?
Well, I'd have to disagree with you. He didn't agree with Gnosticism.
Why don't you tell me, what books do you think in the New Testament, the letters, what books do you think were actually authentic?
I believe all of them were authentic. I believe they were all written by the authors.
You don't believe in pseudographs?
Not in the New Testament literature, no.
Well, what if what you're telling me is that you don't believe that any of the scholarly information thus far, with all the dating and all of the research and all of the studies, you think that you are smarter than all of these scholars who study this day in, day out?
I don't have to be smarter. I have the authority of people who live closer to the time than the modern scholars. And I believe that they had better evidence than the modern scholars have. What the modern scholars are basing their evidence on is form criticism and source criticism, which are theoretical disciplines that developed a couple hundred years ago. The early writers actually knew the people who knew the people, and that's a much better source, much closer.
So tell me, what's more accurate, Acts or Galatians?
I believe they're both completely accurate.
And you don't see any flaw in any of either of those?
No, I realize that the testimony of Paul in Galatians chapter 1 gives different details about his early Christian years than the book of Acts gives, but they are not contradictory.
Oh, so when Paul says that he didn't go to Jerusalem for 3 years, and then in Acts he went right away after his conversion, you don't think that's a contradiction?
Acts does not tell us he went right away. It skips over those 3 years and simply tells the next event.
Okay, give me a passage for that, please.
You give me the passage.
No.
Right away.
No. See, you're making a claim. No. You're stating that it skipped 3 years. I want to know where in Acts it says he skipped 3 years. Tell me that.
It doesn't say that he skipped
exactly.
3 years.
So stop assuming the point in case here. Okay.
Why should I? You're assuming that he didn't skip 3 years, and we have the testimony of Paul himself that there were 3 years there. It's evident that Acts skips it without mentioning it.
You'll notice that Paul himself even says that he never physically met Jesus ever.
Well, Paul doesn't actually say he never met Jesus. That's an inference that all Christians agree with you on, but Paul doesn't say that anywhere in his letters.
In Galatians 1:12, are you familiar with the passage?
Yes, I've got it before me.
For I neither received it of man, neither was I taught it, but by the revelation of Jesus Christ.
Right. He means he didn't receive it from anyone other than Jesus Christ.
Exactly, who was not a man.
You're saying that you think that Paul is saying that he saw Jesus Christ on earth?
He had a vision. He had a vision.
Right, he had a vision. He didn't see Jesus Christ while Jesus was walking on earth.
Of course not. That was exactly what we were saying.
Exactly what he said.
That was what I'm saying. He received it through what the Gnostics refer to as the gnosis. Okay? He received the gnosis from the Gnostic revealer, who, in this case, was Jesus Christ, one of the sons of Sophia and her offspring, which is
I'm afraid that's not what Paul said, so you're making that up.
Of course not.
Paul was blind for 3 days when he saw Jesus. Did the Gnostics have that experience?
According to Acts. But we just determined that Acts and Paul's letters do not have any correlation with each other, since Paul...
We have certainly not determined that. You've asserted it. That's different than determining it.
You have asserted that through speculation, you assume that 3 years were just skipped over magically by the author who decided not to put those 3 years in there, even though Paul makes it very clear.
There's no magic about it. There's no magic about it.
Of course there's not, because the Acts was written 100 years after Paul.
Historians include what they have time and reason to include, and they leave out many things.
I would suggest you talk to Richard Carrier about that, because I'm sure he would disagree with you, and I would consider him a higher authority than you on the history of the Gospels.
Wait a minute. You're telling me that somebody is going to tell me that historians don't leave things out? That what you're telling me?
No, I'm saying about the history of the Gospels here. Okay, I'm not talking about Julius Caesar. Okay, I'm referring to something that's very important to 95% of the world, which is religion. And in every religion up until the contemporary age, okay, no one has thought to question religion and really consider the possibility that it's mythology, just like the thousands of gods that existed beforehand.
Porphyry in the 2nd century questioned religion, and so did there have been skeptics of religion forever.
I'm referring to the majority of people.
I'm not talking. David said, "The fool who said in his heart, there's no God." That was 1,000 years before Christ.
Sure,
there were people who were saying there's no God.
Well, you just misunderstand me. 95%, I'm talking about the majority of the population. I'm not talking about, people like Trypho. I'm not talking about people like Celsus. Okay, I'm not talking about, the very smart elitists of society who didn't want to join Christianity until it gained power. I'm talking about that common man who, like you and me, stumbled upon this religion either through birth or through ignorance and joined up and decided not to question it either by fear of eternal punishment or whatever it may be, okay? And what I'm saying, okay, is you, to me, stem from that particular ideal, that you do not want to look critically and examine what's actually out there. When historians, people who know and look at these documents almost daily, okay, like of course, like we have so many thousand manuscripts from a contemporary age, they look at these daily and decipher them and shuffle through them and decide which translations are going to go in which Bible. You're going to tell me that you still think it's the empirical word of God, even though man decided which particular version of which particular book was going to go in this Bible by votes. And
I'm afraid you don't know as much about that subject as I apparently do, because you are certainly misrepresenting the facts, and you're certainly misrepresenting.
So you've never heard of the Council of Nicaea. You've never heard of the First Vatican Council. You've never heard of the Codex Venaticus, Codex Sinaiticus, and all the codexes of
Are you going to tell me that the Council of Nicaea determined something about the canon of Scripture?
No. Well, actually, yes, I am.
What did they determine?
Well, why don't you tell me what you think the Council of Nicaea was about first?
It was about the deity of Christ and the Trinity. Okay,
and what do you think they added to Mark?
To Mark?
Yes.
You mean the last 12 verses or 20 verses of the Gospel of Mark? Is that what you're referring to?
Yes.
Why would you think they added that? That has nothing to do with the deity of Christ.
Because that is not within any of the earlier codexes of Mark. It is not present in any of the earlier versions of Mark. It is only present after those codexes were published. And
how many earlier codexes of Mark are there?
Why don't you tell me? 2. Okay. And why are they not there?
And do you know
why are those not there?
A writer named Irenaeus, who lived in the 2nd century.
I'm well aware of Irenaeus, thank you.
Okay, he predated all the codices, and he quotes from those disputed verses in Mark as if it was in his Bible.
Does he?
Yes.
Why don't you bring that up for me right now?
I don't have a computer in front of me, but I've read them before. You can look it up if you like. It's on the internet. Irenaeus quoted from the disputed verses at the end of Mark, and he was earlier than all the codices. I don't have the references, but I've read them before. And if you're interested in truth, you could check that out.
You know what? I'm just as versed on all of these early Christians as you are, and I'm sorry to tell you that I think you're truly misstating all the facts, and you're misleading a lot of people, because the truth of the matter is, he might have named the 4 Gospels, okay, but he most certainly did not do what you're saying he did.
You're mistaken.
For your sake, I hope you're right.
Yeah.
Okay. What else you got besides the Bible?
Right. That's where I'm going back to.
What do I have besides the Bible?
I mean, you can go. Okay, just say you walked into a library and pulled a random book off the shelf and read a story from it. and you went home and you told your entire family, and just say this story had some kind of character in it, and you said, this story, this character is completely true. He existed and all this stuff, right? How would you prove that to your family, that this character existed in this book, a random book? And
are we talking about a nonfiction book or a fiction book?
It doesn't really matter.
Well, it makes a great deal of difference.
Okay.
If I'm reading a novel by Tom Clancy, and I read about a character, I'm not going to assume that person.
Say it's a fictional character. Just say it's a fictional character.
Say it's a character that a person in history that we know existed, but it makes some extraordinary claim about that person. Say it's a story about George Washington. Okay. We can verify that George Washington exists, and then this story makes the claim that George Washington chucked a coin across a river, and I don't, Where are we going here? Yeah, there's a George Washington,
or he sprouted wings and flew across the Delaware.
Or that George Washington died and was resurrected.
Okay. Well, I would have to say that if all the histories that have come down to us from George Washington's time said such things about him, I think George Washington was a very extraordinary fellow. Actually, we don't read such things about him, but what we do read about Jesus is we have 4 corroborating histories. And the things that Jesus did seem to be uniformly amazing. In other words, it's not as if he was a guy like George Washington, who was known to be an ordinary man, but on occasion sprung wings and flew. Jesus is described as a man who, from the very beginning of his public ministry, was doing supernatural works and claiming that they were from God. And therefore, I expect that if Jesus existed at all, and if these records bear any testimony to the truth, then he was an extraordinary person and did things that I would not expect to read about someone like George Washington, who, by all reports, was a mere mortal human.
See, but for a scientifically minded person such as myself, an eyewitness account is never, ever going to be sufficient to prove such an extraudinary thing.
I can grant you that, but the problem is that you're being.
I'm not being biased or anything here.
Well, I think you're being limited though, because science can only prove scientific things. When we want to seek historical testimony, for example, in a court of law to decide whether a crime occurred or not, if there is scientific evidence, that's wonderful. But many crimes don't leave what we could call scientific evidence, and the verdict has to rest entirely on competent testimony.
Yeah, but the thing is, occasionally testimony is sufficient. Evidence is required in direct proportion to the extraordinary nature of the claim.
Well, I don't agree with that. I would say that evidence is required of a sort that is suited to the particular kind of claims. In other words, if somebody claimed that a man walked on water and that was a unique event and that certain number of people saw it, well, all we could hope for in the nature of the case is for the eyewitness testimony. We can't go out and try walking on water in a swimming pool to see if this actually happened before, because the nature of the account is that this was not an ordinary occurrence that could be repeated for experiment. And that's the problem. Science can only address things that can be repeated for experiment.
And I agree. That's the problem. In which case, this testimony is worthless.
Not so.
Oh, yes, so.
If people who are competent testimonies have seen it and are willing to die for it, I would say that it's pretty impressive testimony.
No. The nature of such claims as these is that they are scientifically testable, and
no, they're not.
Oh, yes, yes.
They're unique events. Unique events are not scientifically testable. Science addresses things that are not unique but are repeatable.
Exactly. Which if every instance in all of known history, we've never seen this event, and all we have for it is an account of supposed eyewitness accounts in a book that's thousands 1800 more plus years old. You're telling me that that is sufficient to establish the fact that all this knowledge that we have that says that such things are impossible, that such things don't occur, that these couple eyewitness accounts are sufficient to establish that they did?
They did, right.
That's insanity.
Like,
I'm afraid you're selectively skeptical. They're
Selectively skeptical?
The realm of miraculous
listen,
things.
there are.
Excuse me. In the realm of non-supernatural occurrences, unique things happen all the time that could not be repeated in the courtroom for experiment. If somebody, for example, shoots a gun at another person, and the bullet hits a metal coin that is in the man's pocket and deflects for some reason and doesn't penetrate the man, we wouldn't want to try to repeat that experiment in a court of law. However, if there were no people who saw it, then we would say, well, that's a unique event. It can't be tested for experiment.
Well, it wasn't that you have the coin.
Wait. That's a unique event that does not go against something that we see as completely impossible. It does not go against all the evidence that we've ever seen.
The laws of physics.
Those who do believe there is a God who can work miracles.
Well, there have been a few people recently who have claimed to be Jesus and to have performed miracles. How do you know that's not Jesus?
Have there been witnesses who
yes
saw them do the miracle?
Yes.
And lived with them?
Yes. So how do you know that's not Jesus?
I'd like to see the evidence.
Well, why would you like to see the evidence?
I came in this kind of late. What were we talking about?
Well, the reason I like to see the evidence is because I don't like to believe things without evidence.
Wait a minute.
Wait a second. You just
said testimony was enough.
Testimony is evidence in court.
But not in this case?
Yes, it is. I want to see the testimony. That's what I mean. When I say I want to see the evidence, I want to see the testimony.
So, okay.
You want to see the testimony?
Do
a Google search.
What are we talking about now? About who?
On contemporary Jesuses.
Oh, okay. There you go.
I'll tell you what. I'm not going to do a Google search, though. I don't mind looking at the information. The reason I'm not going to do a Google search is this. I already know something about the real Jesus because I happen to have personal experience with him as well as reading about him. And therefore, I know that he hasn't come back and that anyone who's claimed to be him isn't. But I would certainly look at the evidence if someone wanted to present it to me because I would want to be open-minded.
Here it is. What if, take any of David Koresh's followers. You get 4 or 5 of them that testify that he was a Messiah.
Right.
Is that sufficient evidence?
Not really, because the miracles.
Why not?
The miracles that Jesus did were public.
How do they differ from Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John?
The miracles of Koresh were very public.
What about Simon Magnus?
See them at one time?
Are you familiar with Simon
Millions
Magnus?
saw them at one time.
You didn't talk about 500 people. You talked about 4.
Hold on. Simon Magnus. Do you know who Simon Magnus is?
Yes, I do.
Who's Simon Magnus?
He was Simon the sorcerer, who is mentioned in Acts chapter 8, and later went to Rome, flew through the air, and according to tradition, fell down and hurt himself because Peter and Paul prayed for him to fall.
Exactly. Now,
nice
there are about 6 or 7 accounts of him in various writings of the time. All of them claim that he was a god. In fact, that's why he went to Rome. And in mythology, he went because they wanted to see him in front of the Senate perform these miracles for themselves.
I believe that all the references to Simon Magus that I'm aware of were written by Christians who did not believe he was a god, but who said that he claimed to be one.
Even so, people believed in him. People believed in him. Why do you dispute those people?
Because doing miracles is not all it takes to prove that you're God.
But they obviously thought it was.
Messiah.
Well, apparently saying you are and doing miracles is plenty for you. So
that's not true at all. That's not true at all.
Exactly.
You're very weak. I thought you guys were the rational response.
Okay, here we go. Here's that Galatians quote. Here's that Galatians quote. Hold on. That Galatians quote you wanted.
For a few moments?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. I believe that there are supernatural things that happen outside of the Christian tradition. But I believe there are supernatural forces besides that of God, and that not all supernatural things are from God. But I would say this. Jesus, in addition to the supernatural things he did, I believe, fulfilled prophecies that were made about the Messiah, and lived an exemplary life, and rose from the dead, and was seen by hundreds of witnesses afterwards, and is still knowable today. So those are a lot of different things, different than Simon Magus.
I believe that there was a planet called Krypton, and there was a man who descended to Earth, and in his descent, he came down in a big giant meteor and hit the Earth, and
But you don't
everyone
really
around
that.
him.
That's the difference between you
Of
and
course
me.
not, because there's
You're making up-
mythology.
you're making up
There's
atomic book.
mythology, and then there's reality, and you have to know the difference between the two.
I know. That's
And-
why I know the
and
difference.
so-
He said he knows the difference, yet we're talking about knowledge and belief. They're two totally separate things. A moment ago, you were talking all about what you believe, but you don't know.
Now you know.
really don't know.
Well, we've only had, a half hour together. To tell you every reason I believe everything would take a lot longer than that. I've got many reasons. I happen to have a relationship with God that is in addition
I have a
to the
relationship with
objective
Superman.
evidence that I was appealing to. Frankly, I'm only stating things that are factual.
like
And
the
you're
gospel accounts being
wrong.
eyewitnesses.
And the fact that we believe in Superman from Krypton, that's only factual as well. Just to be put that in perspective.
Can I go back really seriously to Galatians again?
Yeah.
I mean, I want to know what your definition of revelation is.
Okay, well, revelation means something disclosed, in the case of biblical revelation, from God, something that would not be, discernible probably through natural inquiry because it's something from which a veil has been removed. The word revelation, apocalypsis in the Greek, means the pulling away of the veil. So it is something that would be veiled to the average person, but in God's revelation to somebody, he's pulling the veil away and showing somebody something supernaturally that other people would not see necessarily.
That sounds very Gnostic to me. I don't know about
Well,
you.
and it also sounds like a personal conversation between two people or two entities, correct? Is that what you're trying to say?
In Paul's case, there was a personal conversation.
There's no witness to that.
Of course
Well,
not. He states pretty clearly it wasn't.
and heard
Right.
a noise.
All right, so you're basically believing one man who had a revelation with a mystical being 2,000 years ago, okay? And you're taking his word for it. That's what
About his own experience? Why not?
That's one man 2,000 years ago had a revelation with a quote unquote ghost, okay?
Well, no, Paul wouldn't say it was a ghost.
Well, I know
Something
Paul
that would
would.
get any more. Something that would
well,
get any
what are you
competent
calling it? You
person
said it.
committed
You
to a
said
mental
it.
institution.
You said it wasn't flesh and blood. So what are you calling it? What are you calling this
Okay.
entity?
Christ arose.
No.
in flesh.
What are you calling this entity? You're not calling it flesh and blood, so it's obviously something else other than flesh and blood. So what are you calling this entity
Okay, let me
that
speak.
he had a revelation from?
Would you like to let me speak? I'll answer your question.
Yes. Cool.
Okay.
Go.
Paul did see the resurrected Christ. Christ resurrected in flesh. And when I said he did not see Jesus in the flesh, I believe that we were talking about when Jesus was on earth. If I was mistaken about your context, then I did not say what I would have said if I had understood your context. Of course, I believe Paul saw Jesus in the flesh after his ascension in that revelation. But what I was arguing is that Paul never claimed that he had seen Jesus while Jesus was on earth.
Okay. While he supposedly was in the flesh, right? So he saw him after the flesh, right? He was other than flesh, right?
He was flesh before and after his resurrection. And he was flesh in heaven when Paul saw him.
Flesh in heaven?
Really?
That's right.
Oh, the Bible says something about no man can enter the heaven in the flesh.
It actually says flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God. But the kingdom of God is not the same thing as heaven, and no one claims that Jesus arose flesh and blood.
What the point that Rich was trying to make here is Paul's testimony is that his dealings, when Paul was on earth, Paul's dealings were with Christ in a non-corporeal form, in some supernatural form. Okay, do you agree with that?
That Christ was supernatural after the resurrection, I certainly would agree with.
Yeah, and Paul never saw, while Paul himself was on earth, Paul never saw Christ in the flesh until Paul got to heaven.
Well, see, Paul doesn't say whether he saw flesh or not. He said he saw Christ.
Okay, but
The teaching of Paul is that Christ rose from the dead in the flesh, and therefore,
Okay.
Where
we
is
would
that?
assume that
Okay,
he would
wait.
say that was in the flesh.
I'm just here. I'm trying to be calm here because I honestly don't know these stories all that well.
I don't either.
But okay. So in Paul's vision, he might have seen Christ in the flesh in that vision, but his vision was not of a Christ on earth. Correct?
Right, not of Christ on earth. That's correct.
So-
Yeah, Paul never claims to be a witness to what happened to Christ on earth.
Right. Okay. So Paul's testimony that he would have given while he was on earth was of something that he saw that only he could see.
Presumably, he only saw Christ when he was on the road to Damascus. Yeah, and his companions, he said, did not see another man.
Rich's point then was that you're taking this one guy, his word for it, that he saw this, who has been dead and gone for 2,000 years.
Well, there's nothing inconsistent with his word from that of other witnesses that wrote other things in Scripture, and therefore there's nothing intrinsically
about other
improbable.
witnesses, though.
On another note, you keep talking about in the book of Acts, conversion story of Paul again, and that supposedly he was, around his traveling companions. But Galatians 1:15-22 paints a pretty different picture about his conversion story, and that he did not confer with anybody, not a single human being, after he received his conversion. Like, the reason why he went into seclusion was because his conversion was so important to him. It was so personal that he didn't want to convert right away, which is why he waited 3 years to go to Jerusalem. And what I'm saying is, this is another point that the book of Galatians, is not in any way dependent on the book of Acts and vice versa, because the book of Acts was written in a very Christian age, by an author who probably didn't even know anybody who existed at this time, because the average age limit was 48 at the time. So how you're going to confer this, I want to know. How are you going to resolve the situation here between Acts and...
Okay, when people bring up these kinds of objections, they are transparently misunderstanding what is being said by the author.
Are you getting into context again?
What's that?
It's really pointless.
If you're getting into context.
No, when Paul said that he did not confer with flesh and blood, it means he did not go down and see the apostles.
I did not confer with another human being at any time. At any time.
He didn't confer with them. That's right. It doesn't mean he didn't proclaim.
Whether it was flesh and blood or spirit is pointless.
No, we're not talking about that. We're not talking about that.
If you're interested in knowing my answer, then let me speak for a moment at least, please.
I'm listening to you. Go ahead.
Paul, when a man says he does not confer with people, it means he has not had any kind of a conference with them. That's what confer means. He does not say, I didn't tell anybody about what happened. He says, I didn't confer with people. That means he did. What Paul is trying to prove to his readers is that he is not dependent on his information about the gospel upon anyone else, and that he did not have to confer with others who had known Christ in order to get his information, but he got it directly by revelation from Christ. That's what he's saying.
Is it now? Where does it say that?
In the passage you just cited.
I do not see that anywhere. I see I did not confer with another human being at any time, nor did I go up to Jerusalem to see any of those who were apostles before me. Instead, I went to Arabia and came back to Damascus. And 3 years later, I went up to Jerusalem to become acquainted with Cephas, and I stayed with him for 15 days, but I did not see any of the apostles except for James, the brother of the Lord. I don't see anywhere about any of the things that you just told me. I honestly, I can't find what you said anywhere in the passage. So
you don't see what Paul is saying in that entire chapter and why he's writing it. He's writing it in order to show that his knowledge of the gospel does not depend on other people that he ever conferred with, but it depends on his personal experience.
That's fine, but that doesn't change the topic. That doesn't change the topic of that point right there. Whether or not he's dependent on anybody else is irrelevant. What I'm saying is that he did not. He states the reason why.
It's not irrelevant.
The reason why he's not dependent on anybody else is because he did not talk with anybody. He didn't confer with anybody for 3 years.
He doesn't say he never had a conversation. He did not confer with people about this doctrine he's teaching. That's what he's talking about.
I understand that. So what about the people who were with him, standing there, who were blinded by this light?
We have no record that he ever conferred with them about it.
But they were there. Right,
sure,
but why
we don't have any evidence that he conferred with them.
Why is that missing from Galatians?
Why is it important for him to put it in?
Because obviously it has some importance. Because apparently, if this God appeared to 500 people, then should it not be apparent that he chose specifically not to do it with his followers who are right there next to him?
To use an
why would they be vital to put it in Acts then?
Where are the 500 accounts too?
Yeah, where are those accounts that you claim that this is true? Why aren't there any more accounts?
One of the problems with getting those 500 accounts is that we don't have that many documents of any kind from that period because documents are very rare from that period.
Whoa. How about 10 of the 500?
Excuse me. We do have Paul telling his audience that 500 or more people saw Christ at one time, and he specifically said, many of whom are still alive, implying if you'd like to confer with them,
would be
you may do
hearsay.
so.
This is Richard Carrier, and I support the Rational Response Squad. Be sure to tune in every week.
Well, it seems to me like you told me a number of things about myself which you don't know and which are false.
Like what? Tell me.
You told me that I'm a product of the tendency to pick up religion from upbringing and to never question it and never to challenge the witnesses. I'm afraid you don't know much about me at all.
And I'm afraid the same goes for you. I mean, you've told us that it's, our skeptical biases that do this and do that.
Well, were you raised a Christian?
Yeah, were you raised a Christian?
I was raised a Christian, but I did not buy into everything my parents taught me at all. I went through.
That's not what I said.
I went through rebellion when I was a teenager, like everybody else, or like most people do.
Were you still a Christian?
I later forged my own viewpoint from my own consideration of evidence, and that viewpoint differs from the vast majority of the Christianity I was raised with.
But you still appeal to a little tradition.
Yeah, you haven't left the faith. Am I correct in assuming that?
I have not left the germ of the faith, but much of the teaching of the church that I was raised in I reject.
But you still have a bias there that I was referring to when I made that comment. I didn't say that you followed every teaching exactly that your parents told you. I said that you were a product of a biased upbringing, which you are. Whether that product is the same as it was when you were a kid is irrelevant. What my general point was very true, and it remains true, as in this conversation it has been proven over and over again that you still are a product of that bias, and that's my point. Okay.
Well, I mean, you can declare that if you wish to. I think the opposite is obviously true. I think anyone who listens to this conversation who's unbiased would recognize that if there were no supernatural element in the four Gospels, you would find no reason to find them non-historical or to question them because they're simply historical documents. But because of your bias against the supernatural,
it has nothing to do with the supernatural.
Skepticism that you would not subject them to otherwise.
I look at everything at the same manner of skepticism that I do the Bible, and that is because as an honest individual, it is my right and duty, okay, to make sure that everything I believe in, I know about to the succinct point, the most minute detail, okay? That's my personal opinion, and even those around me have that similar opinion. It's not a bias. It's not a form of selective skepticism, okay?
Do you believe in the Entebbe rescue?
I'm sorry?
Do you believe in the truthfulness of the Entebbe rescue, where the Israeli Air Force went in and rescued hostages out of Uganda and they rescued all the hostages from an airplane from terrorists, killed all the terrorists, and none of the Israelis except the leader was killed. It was just an amazing, almost miraculous thing that happened. I don't consider it miraculous, but I believe it happened because the news reports reported, and I don't see any reason to doubt it. Do you believe that happened?
But okay.
What does that do with anything?
I'm not familiar with that story.
Wait. What has to do with anything is this: you said that you have the same degree of skepticism.
That's very true, and I do. I am a very avid skeptic of the news.
That is contemporary to us, though.
Even still, I would hold that to the same. I would hold that to the same amount of skepticism I hold everything else.
Okay, look.
Most certainly.
The thing is, that story that you just recounted to us, nothing supernatural happened there. Nothing.
I didn't claim it did, but something very exceptional and unusual that we wouldn't
exceptional and unusual, fine, but nothing that goes against everything that we know about the world. Nothing
what
that
do we know about the world.
How
much do we know about the world?
Quite a bit. And okay.
What percentage of knowledge do you suppose we possess?
Here you go with the comfort. You're only using 10% of your brain, Brian.
Look, can I make the point? All this is you're leading down a road to is an argument from ignorance, and we're not going to go there. But the point is that story that you recounted to us, while exceptional and while out of the ordinary, doesn't go against every shred of empirical observation that we've ever had. You take something like a resurrection, that goes against every empirical observation of death ever made. And, it goes back to the point that, you think that mere eyewitness testimony is enough to establish that one event happened, one time, and that it isn't repeatable, and that that witness testimony in and of itself is sufficient to establish one of the most extraordinary claims ever made. Like, you tell me something like that, and I cringe. I really do. because I mean, like, you would never accept that for anything that want with your to do with your faith.
And that just doesn't
That's
apply.
not true.
Wait, and
actually, let me correct you about that. I have heard of resurrections from the dead from other religions as well, and they are not related to my faith, and I don't doubt them just because I hear that they happen.
Then why do you doubt them? Then why do you doubt them?
Why do I doubt them?
Yes.
I don't necessarily doubt them. If there are eyewitnesses to say that it happened, that's you can't hope for empirical proof of something that can't be repeated for experiment.
Apparently, if all these
every miracle that is reported in Christianity or any other religion, if it occurred, is a unique historical occurrence, and you simply can't subject unique historical occurrences to empirical.
So where were the thousands of other accounts that supposedly were supposed to take place? The people who witnessed this, thousands of people supposedly witnessed the mass multitude at the Sermon on the Mount. Yet you can only bring together 4 unverified, very, very disputed, very what's the word I'm looking for here? They're called the Synoptic Gospels, but they have nothing really in common. You bring this to us, and yet you can only bring 4 of these out of the multitudes that supposedly existed at the time, and that's enough for you.
I am not claiming there were a multitude of written documents.
I didn't say that you did. I'm sorry if you misunderstood.
Okay.
I
do agree that many things historically, let's say. The civil war in Rome after Nero committed suicide. I believe there were thousands of witnesses to that, but only a few writers have recorded it. I don't think that most people carried pen and paper because they didn't have them in those days.
However,
most people were writers. Some people were.
There's also archaeological evidence.
If the writers who did write all confirm the same story, pretty much, I'd say that's good enough for me, frankly.
Well, there was also evidence, archaeological evidence for that.
That's just it. It's good enough for you, but it's not for us. I think the original.
That's fine. Yeah. I didn't come on here in order to tell you have to believe. I came here to tell you why I believe, and I have no shame. I have no embarrassment at all about my basis for belief. I've got tremendous basis of belief. The only thing that differs from my starting point and yours is that I believe that miracles might happen. I don't come to the proposition with it.
I do believe that miracles might happen.
I don't come to the question with the proposition that they must happen, but I believe that they might happen, and if they do, they might have been witnessed. And if they were witnessed and reported by credible testimony, then I'm open to them, and you're not.
Okay, no. Let's be clear. Nobody is saying that miracles cannot happen.
Yeah, no one here is holding that.
What I have been saying all along is that a miracle claim is an extraordinary one, and no amount of simple of 2,000-year-old witness testimony is ever going to be enough to establish that it happened.
Well, let me ask you this: if a miracle of any kind happened 2,000 years ago, what kind of evidence would you look for?
Physical evidence?
What kind of physical evidence would you look for?
Well, I mean, it depends on what's being claimed here. But
okay, if a man walked on water, what kind of physical evidence would you look for?
We probably couldn't find any.
Wait a second.
No, you told me eyewitness testimony is not enough. What is enough?
I'll tell you what's enough. How about the things that aren't miracles mentioned in the Gospels that have absolutely no and should evidence for supporting their claims? Like for example, the slaughter of the innocents. Absolutely no mention anywhere in any of the contemporary accounts of the time of that happening. How many contemporary accounts of Herod's reign do we have?
Josephus
is probably the biggest one. Philo, for example. Who else? Pliny the Elder.
And did they give comprehensive histories of Herod the Great?
Josephus had major issues with Herod.
He hated him. Why would he not mention that incident? Why would that thing? I mean, if you had the deaths of that many people, why would you ignore that? Especially since, ironically, it seems to parallel what took place in Exodus. Okay, with the Pharaoh, which obviously left unnamed because the story of Exodus really didn't happen. But if you have the same sort of event and you want to parallel that with what's going on because you want to show that Jesus is like Moses, you would do something like that. You would definitely try to incorporate the two stories together and show somehow that there was a linkage there. And that's what happened.
Are you saying that Matthew, who records that, would try to link it with the Exodus? Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying that if he were trying to
what does that have to do with there being
the
lack of other contemporary evidence for the event? What does that have to do with it?
The fact that he was trying to establish an allegorical story and not a literal definitive point. Okay,
How do you know that?
Allegorical writing was very common during the time period.
How do you know that's what Matthew was doing?
The time period he was writing in, that sort of writing style was very, very similar to that of other, what I want to say, Orphic cults of the time, which exactly what Gnosticism and Christianity was. It was an Orphic cult. Okay?
No, it was not an Orphic cult. How do you know that it was?
Okay, do you know anything about...
You asked me for my evidence. Give me some evidence. How do you know it was an Orphic cult?
Because it follows the Orphic principles.
How do you know?
What do you mean? Let's see. Battles between good and evil. Okay. Punishment after death.
What is the earliest historic attestation for the Orphic cult that you know of?
Plato. Probably before that. There is actually... Not only is it in Plato and also in some of... Aristotle's mentions. It's also in the Zoroastrian tradition. It's also in the Essenes. There's archaeological evidence for it. I can go on if you want me to.
And so you believe that the Jews who started Christianity were into these Greek ideas?
Most certainly. I believe the Essenes were the ones who started, as a matter of fact. I believe that the Essenes became the Gnostics, and the Gnostics through a lot of confusion because there was... I'm not going to disagree that some people around the later years of the 1st century CE believed in a literal Christ. I'm not going to dispute that fact because there were anti-Gnostics out there who believed in a literal Christ. However, okay, I believe that the very foundation of Christianity is one based on Greek Hellenism, okay, that very, very well incorporated the time period. Okay, I'm talking about 197, the Seleucid Empire, taking over and enforcing Greek religion. As a matter of fact, the Second Temple was designated a sanctuary for Zeus. Okay, if Jews didn't follow the Greek religion, they were sentenced to the penalty of death. Okay,
and many didn't. The Hasidim didn't.
Oh, I know. I'm very well aware of the history. And the fact of the matter is, okay, the influence is still there. Okay, there were many Orphic cults during that time period. Many Orphic cults. Okay, I won't say Orphic cults because it wasn't necessarily Orphism, but they follow a lot of the Orphic traits. Okay, the fact of the matter is, okay, there were these cults, okay, there were Essenes who had a lot of Orphic tradition embedded in them. For example, the battle of good and evil, the duration of the soul, the punishment after death. It's so ingrained in their writings. I've been fluidly studying the Dead Sea Scrolls right now because I'm working on a dissertation, and it's very vital to me, okay, that I get all my facts straight on this because this is part of my dissertation. So all of this I'm talking about with you right now is actually going to be in my dissertation, which I'm going to be talking about hopefully at the end of this show. But now you want to tell me that you don't believe that the Orphic tradition lies in Christianity, the very nature of it, when in fact that's exactly what it is. I mean, the battles between good and evil, for example, Satan and God, the war of Gog and Magog, okay, in Revelations, okay, very Orphic traditions, okay, you have the eternal punishment.
Gog and Magog actually goes back to Ezekiel, which is not probably influenced by Orphic traditions at all.
Well, that's true, okay, but the fact of the matter is, in Revelations is a very poetic, Hellenistic book.
You're telling me that Revelation, which actually alludes to the book of Ezekiel 48 times, that it's referring, when it mentions Gog and Magog in chapter 20, that it's alluding to an Orphic cult instead of to
No, you misinterpret what I'm saying. I'm saying that the reason why they felt it necessary to mention that, okay, is because of the influences that took place during that time period that was written in. Okay, the same thing with what's going on with Matthew, okay? He's trying to incorporate, okay, a sense of importance in his story. Okay, he wants to incorporate a sense of realism, and that's what authors do. Okay, authors try to incorporate a sense of realism to bring a story out, to make it likable and enjoyable, and to get his point across.
Hey, Rook, sorry to interrupt, but we've got to wrap this show up. It's already gone over. In fact, we're not going to be able to get to your dissertation in the show. We'll have to do that in the next show.
Uh-oh. Be prepared.
But Steve, please go ahead and give us any last word that you'd like to on tonight's discussion.
Sure, and first of all, I want to thank you for letting me come on here and dialogue with you and with your audience. My position is, and has been for a very long time, that the only reason that anyone rejects the Gospels as history is because of a presupposition against the supernatural, and that if the supernatural element were not found in the Gospels, there would be nothing that people would find to object to in them as historical documents. And as someone has said in this conversation on your side, you simply can't accept eyewitness testimony for the occurrence of a miracle. That's not a good enough evidence. And yet, when I asked what evidence would you allow, it was clear that no possible other kind of evidence could be imagined for a one-time event.
How about a picture?
A picture, right? Well, we didn't have photographs more than a couple hundred years ago. So
he could have drawn one.
So in other words, if there were in fact such a miracle as Christianity claims, that is, if Jesus Christ rose from the dead, and if the other miracles that are claimed for him actually happened, there would be no other evidence available than eyewitness testimony. But in my own experience, I have come to know Jesus, the same Jesus that is described there, and I have lived, for example, by faith financially for 35 years. I've never let anyone know when I have financial needs. I never solicit money. I've never sent out a newsletter. I've paid bills. I've raised 5 children to adulthood. I've owned 2 houses without a mortgage. I am debt-free, and I have all my needs met. And I have for 35 years by simply I minister, I travel the world, and I teach, and I just trust God to provide my needs. And he does. I don't charge for what I do. I don't ask for money, and I have seen the provision of God in answer to prayer in a timely fashion hundreds of times, probably thousands of times, if I were to count them up. And if God were not real, I'd be starving to death right now, frankly. But it is because I'm following the same path the apostles followed. I'm seeing the same kind of provisions and the same kind of interventions from the risen Jesus Christ that they saw. You folks aren't following that path, so I guess you don't see those things very often, but that's my testimony, and I appreciate you letting me give it.
I just wanted to say, I apologize if this show got a little harsh at times. That's certainly not our intention, and we do try to stay civil. Sometimes rational.
Mild as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, good. Good.
I'll be on with the infidel guy on the 28th.
Well, that'll be more mild.
Yeah.
But just to address 2 issues from your closing statement, I haven't really had the chance to talk at all on the show, and I've got 3 guys that want to interrupt me. But just to address 2 things from your closing statement. One, this presupposition that we all have as non-believers that we don't want to believe in supernatural. All of us believed in the supernatural. I personally grew up believing in Jesus and loving Jesus, and got my first Holy Communion, and then became born again. And Jesus was all up in me, and Jesus was my life. So it was only until I started looking at things critically that I realized that it wasn't true. It was not anything. It had nothing to do with some sort of presupposition to not wanting to accept the supernatural, because I did for my entire life. And if I didn't have an open mind, I still would accept the supernatural. Additionally, you made some sort of claim about not accepting any form of money, when I just wanted it noted that on your website, it talks all about how you accept donations through PayPal, and that you receive contributions through what you call what the Lord is providing, and that people are able to contribute. And you might say that you don't encourage it, but meanwhile, talks right about on your website how you can contribute.
I did not say I don't accept money. Of course I accept money. I don't solicit money. And you'll find that I don't solicit for myself there if you read what I wrote. I would think
if you're not going to solicit money, you probably would want to take all sorts of information about how to give you money off of your website. But did one of you guys have some sort of statement?
Any money that is contributed through the PayPal on my website, none of it pays any of my bills. It all goes to pay radio station bills. I don't solicit money for myself at the website.
Well, it goes to pay bills, but that's neither here nor there.
Radio bills, radio station bills. It doesn't pay my rent, my food doesn't. None of it goes to me.
Just so you know, I mean, we live in a capitalist system where I have absolutely no problem with you making money. So that's not the issue. My only issue is more that you would state that you're not accepting money, or you don't have the ability to give money, or you don't solicit for money.
I didn't say I don't accept money. I do accept money, but I don't solicit money.
Okay, so it's all semantics game. That's fine. I mean,
No, you don't understand. One moment, please. The PayPal link no money can be contributed to me through that PayPal link. That money goes to pay radio stations for radio time. None of it.
I mean, you really want to go like this? I mean, and if nobody contributes through PayPal, who would have to pay it?
Pardon?
And if nobody contributes through PayPal, who would have to pay it?
We go off the air.
So you wouldn't pay it?
I don't.
You've never had to. You've never had to come.
I don't have the money.
You've never had to come out of pocket.
I don't have the money to pay the radio bills. It's $7,000 a month. I don't have that kind of money.
All right. Well, it's neither here nor there. I mean, honestly, I don't really care. So it's
what I'm saying is
it $7,000 a month? Is it $7,000 a month?
35 years, most of it without a website and without a radio program.
Steve, is it $7,000 a month?
God has provided all my needs.
You stated it's $7,000 a month. Is it $7,000 a month or the $4,000 a month that you stated on your website?
Well, we added a station since then. I have to add it because we added a Portland station that's $3,000 a month more. So we added that in February. So that I guess the website has to be updated.
Okay. If you're paying $7,000 a month and you don't solicit for money, I would think that you would go out pretty quick. I'm sure that somehow people know how to send you money, or else.
You would think so, wouldn't you?
Yeah, you would think. Well, yeah.
Especially if you don't believe in God.
Well, that has nothing to do with it. Anyway, Mike.
It has a lot to do with it because actually God does provide for me, and He does so without my soliciting money for myself.
Well,
radio station's another entirely different thing because I don't make any money off that.
Way to diminish the kind contributions of your followers right there by telling them that it wasn't them, it's God. But anyway,
what's he get care packages?
Go ahead, Mike. If you want to say something, go ahead. We got to wrap this up.
Yeah. And I was the guy that you were talking about with the evidence for. 2,000-year-old miracle.
Yeah.
And that you made the comment that there's no evidence that I would accept. If witness testimony is, you asked me, well, what would I accept? And I actually never gave me a chance to come up with anything. To tell you the truth, other than apart from extraordinary physical evidence, I can't really think of something that would do it. But the thing for me is, I would think that if God wanted me to know about that miracle and that He understood my standards for evidence concerning it, He would have given it to me. Would He not? Or is it just something that I have to...
It's a rhetorical question. I mean, if God's all-knowing, He knows exactly what sort of evidence to provide.
What God would do or would not do, but it seems to me like He's given plenty of evidence to anyone who's open-minded about it.
But the thing is,
there's an empty tomb there.
Well, there isn't. But if God's all-knowing, He would know. If God's all-knowing, He would know exactly what evidence to provide in order to convince Mike that those miracles occurred. But
right. I don't believe that God has any interest in convincing people who are not interested in the basic truth.
Well, that wouldn't be us because we're very interested in the truth, and as believers, ex-believers, we would all be more interested in being believers for the rest of our lives. It's much easier to live like that. I
find it more difficult, frankly.
It's more difficult to be in the majority and live a happy, blissful existence with a belief in something that makes you feel like you're going to live forever.
I don't follow this belief because of any hopes of living forever. I do believe that, but that's a corollary of what I believe. I follow Jesus Christ because he's real and because he deserves to be followed.
You can do whatever you want and your sins will be forgiven. That's real difficult.
I don't believe that. I don't believe that I can do anything I want to. I believe I'm obligated to follow Jesus Christ and obey His commands.
And yet,
I actually follow a much harder lifestyle than you do.
That might and might not be true.
I don't even know how you would even put that on a scale of what that's even.
I seriously doubt that.
What's harder than what another?
Do you avoid fornication?
No.
Why would I?
Okay, well I do, and that's harder than what you do.
You're married.
No, I'm not.
Oh, okay. I thought I saw a picture of your wife on the website.
I have been married. I've been widowed.
Oh, so, I'm sorry. Sorry about that.
And divorced.
So you're celibate?
I am celibate, yes.
I feel sorry. I really do.
But that's a
harder. Do you masturbate?
To Jesus than not to.
Do you masturbate?
No, I don't.
Well, see, that's a personal.
Wait, I take it back. You do have a harder life than I do.
I know, and I would, if the evidence was not compelling to my rational mind, I would certainly not follow the kind of course of life I follow.
I'm just curious.
I believe that the evidence is absolutely compelling.
Just curious to lead us out of here. What passage of the Bible is it that that tells you that you can't have sex or you will not go to heaven?
The Bible says that no fornicator will inherit the kingdom of God. 1 Corinthians 6, 9, and 10.
This is a Ray Comfort argument here. You fornicated in the past?
When I was very young, yes.
And so what does that make you?
That makes me a repentant fornicator.
Okay, and so no fornicator can accept the kingdom of heaven. Why do you even bother?
Unless you repent.
Because I'm repentant, I'm not a fornicator anymore.
So you can do whatever you want and be forgiven.
Pardon?
So you can do whatever you want and be forgiven, as I stated 5 minutes ago.
There is forgiveness for sin if one is truly repentant, but if a person is truly repentant, it's because they didn't want to do it.
And that part is not harder.
What's that?
That part is not harder.
Well, it is for me because
than my personal responsibility.
I have to live an obedient life. That's required.
You don't have to do anything. You just choose to. There's a difference.
Well, I mean, as a Christian, I have to live an obedient life because Christians who say that you don't have to be obedient are simply not reading the Bible accurately. The Bible commands us to obey Christ. Jesus said, "If you aren't born a my words, then you are my disciples indeed."
I just want to do one more final thing here before we close this up. I just want to thank you again for being on the show. I want to let you know that although our debate got heated, I respect what knowledge you have of the Bible and of the other texts. You have been by far one of the most compelling debaters I've had on the show